The Jets have been officially eliminated from postseason contention. That makes their playoff drought 15 straight years. If they want to avoid making it 16 next year, this team needs a lot of work. And the most important thing is finding a solution at quarterback. Locked On Jets starts now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, December 9th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day, and thanking you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. A big shout out to you everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. Well, the New York Jets suffered an ugly loss week 14 to the Miami Dolphins. They were blown out, and in that defeat, the Jets were officially eliminated from playoff contention. That makes 15 straight years the Jets have missed the playoffs. On today's show, we're going to talk about what this team needs to do during the offseason to avoid extending that to 16. And there's a lot of work that has to be done. The Jets need to upgrade the quarterback position and find a solution there, but they also need to build pieces around the quarterback. They need to give the quarterback weapons. And they need to rebuild the defense that, frankly, does not have many pieces right now. But let's start by talking about the most important component, and that is the quarterback. And if you're a longtime Jets fan, you know that this has been a chronic issue for this franchise. In some ways, the Jets have been searching for a franchise quarterback since Joe Namath left the team. You know, there were a couple of good years with Ken O'Brien in the 80s. There were a couple of good years with Chad Pennington in the early 2000s. You know, maybe that 1 year with Ryan Fitzpatrick, the quarterback situation was pretty good. But this is a team that has suffered at the quarterback position. And in the NFL, if you don't have a quarterback, you can't win. And that's always been the case. You know, this is not a new phenomenon in the 2020s. It's been true going back close to 100 years. Teams that have good quarterbacks win. The role of passing has increased through the years, but you've always needed a good quarterback since the league moved to a system where you snap the ball to the same guy every time, and the league moved towards a drop back passing game. Jets simply have not been good enough at the quarterback position, and that has continued this year. You know what happened with Justin Fields. The Jets signed him this offseason. They were hoping he would succeed as an upside play, and it simply did not work. The question is, what do the Jets do at the quarterback position this offseason? And I think the odds are pretty high the Jets are going to draft a quarterback early in the NFL draft. And I think that if they don't, they almost certainly will in 2027. Now, difficult to say who the Jets are going to be able to draft if they do go in that direction, because we still have the college football playoff left to play, and we still have 4 games left in the regular season. And the Jets could improve or hurt their draft positioning by winning or losing games going forward. But I do have my eye on the college football playoff, because it seems right now like there are 3 quarterbacks likely to be drafted high in the first round. There's Fernando Mendoza out of Indiana, who has had a fantastic season. If you saw him on Saturday night against Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game, he played an excellent game against an excellent defense. Mendoza has been one of the biggest risers this season. And if Indiana goes out and wins the national championship, and if he plays really well, there's a good chance he's going to be the #1 overall pick. Either the team holding the #1 spot will pick him, or if it's a team that's set at quarterback, they likely will trade down. So that's worth watching for Mendoza. There's also Dante Moore out of Oregon. And I've only started recently studying these quarterbacks, but Moore, I think, has put together some really impressive film. I think the playoffs are going to be important for him, though, also. You know, he's a young guy. He's only going to be 21 at the start of the next NFL season. And whenever you're dealing with a young guy and he doesn't have a ton of starting experience in college, when you're in that sort of situation, it's very wise to invest in a quality veteran quarterback, because you don't want to put that guy on the field too early. You know, it's a real danger if you do that, because a quarterback without a lot of experience, you know, there are going to be a lot of coverages in the NFL that he's never seen before. And you don't want him to lose his confidence by getting tricked by too many times, particularly in this city where the quarterback can be a lightning rod. It'll be interesting to see how Moore does. Ty Simpson out of Alabama is the other guy who there's a lot of buzz around, but he has not played well down the stretch. And I think that the playoff is also important for him, because he's got to shake off this slump. You know, he could very well play himself out of the high first round. He may end up going middle first round, low first round, maybe even lower if he doesn't pick up his game going forward. Now, I've changed my mind since the trade deadline about whether it's wise for the Jets to draft a quarterback this year in the first round. I was against it before the trade deadline, but all the extra draft picks the Jets brought in makes me more comfortable if the team did it, because you got to surround a young quarterback with the right pieces. I think if we've learned anything as Jets fans over the last 2 decades, it's the danger in not putting the proper pieces around your quarterback. Now, that's partially about coaching. It's partially about getting the right coaches in to instruct the quarterback. But it's also about making sure you have a good offensive line and a good set of receivers. The Jets have a good start on their offensive line. They have 3 young guys who are good players: Olu Fashanu, Armand Membou, and Joe Tippmann. They'll have to figure out 2 of the interior spots, but that's a good place to start. At the receiver spots, well, we'll talk a little bit about the skill positions going forward. But I think the odds are pretty good the Jets are going to draft a quarterback early. I think the odds are really high the Jets are going to bring a veteran one way or another. If they don't draft a quarterback, a veteran will likely be the starter. And even if they do draft a quarterback, you're probably going to want to bring someone in just to, as a placeholder in case the young quarterback's not ready. You don't want to repeat the mistake the Jets made with Zach Wilson, where there was no competition and Zach Wilson wasn't ready. And in 2021, I think the Jets just decided they were going to be terrible anyway. Let's just get Zach Wilson the reps and see where he's at. Well, I think looking back, and I can't even say this is a second guess because this is something a lot of people said at the time, the Jets really did know Zach Wilson no favors by throwing him on the field too early. Now, the veteran market, as you might imagine, is not terribly robust. Anybody who's a good quarterback in the league is on a team, and their team's going to be very reluctant to let them go. So the Jets are going to have to choose from a number of flawed options. I would imagine even with his injury, the Colts are going to try and bring Daniel Jones back. And Jones suffered a devastating injury. It's really heartbreaking to see that happen to Daniel Jones, who was finally reaching the promise of a first-round pick in Indianapolis this year. And I know, for the Jets, the Colts losing games is actually, helps their draft positioning because they own the Colts first-round pick. But I mean, to me, that was devastating what happened to Daniel Jones. But I think the Colts will likely keep him. So for the Jets, you're looking, at a group of options that include guys like Joe Flacco. Would the Jets bring back Joe Flacco, who's at the end of his career, but shown that he can still throw the ball? He's shown that, you give him an offensive line, you give him receivers, you give him something, he could still play at a reasonably high level. Can his body hold up another year? That's an open question. Would you go with somebody like Marcus Mariota, who's currently with Washington, who's not really a spectacular option, but a guy who's not going to reach the depths of Justin Fields this year? The thing with Fields was the ceiling was high, but the floor was really low. And we have seen the floor from Justin Fields. You could also go with a cheap option like a Gardner Minshew out of Kansas City. Minshew has plenty of starting experience. His level of play has been that of a backup. If you're looking for a stopgap who maybe can get you through a month or so, Minshew might be the guy. There aren't really a lot of great options. Another name that could come on the radar, who I've heard a couple times, is Kyler Murray, who I would be inclined to stay away from unless he came really cheap. And I think the big part of that is that I think Kyler Murray, because he's so short, needs an offense designed tailor-made to his skill sets. And I don't think Tanner Engstrand's really shown that he's got the ability to tailor an offense to his quarterback. We haven't really seen that this year. The Jets, I guess, could go back with Tyrod Taylor, although I would highly advise against that. But the Jets need to figure out the quarterback position. And I think that, there is a path forward if the Jets build the right team, that maybe one of these mid-tier veterans, if you go the mid-tier veteran route, there's no question you're going to need some luck. You're going to need the right schedule. You're going to need certain guys to perform that maybe you aren't expected to perform. You're going to need good injury luck. You'll need some lucky bounces of the ball. It's possible the Jets could put together, with all the resources the Jets have this offseason, it's possible the Jets could put together a pretty decent team. Or if you're going with a rookie, you're going with more upside. It's going to be imperative for the Jets to build a quality team. Fortunately, they have the pieces. They're going to enter the offseason probably with among the five greatest amounts of cap space in the league, and 4 premium picks, 4 picks that will be in the first 2 rounds. But it's going to be very important to build around the quarterback. Ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about the pieces the Jets need to fill in around the quarterback this offseason. because whether it's a veteran or whether it's a rookie, Jets aren't going to be able to get a quarterback who's going to be able to carry the load in year one. They're going to, at best, get a quarterback who can execute if the situation's good. So how do the Jets make the situation good? That's what we'll discuss continuing here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into the moment with live spreads and money lines that adjust instantly, player props as guys heat up, and you can bet on the next touchdown scorers, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, every possibility. Looking ahead to this Sunday, it's Week 15 action. The Jets visiting the Jacksonville Jaguars. No surprise, Jacksonville playing well. The Jets not playing well. The Jaguars are 11.5-point favorites, and I would not be surprised to see that line move as we get deeper into the week. Well, FanDuel's the place to get in on the action. So if you want to be right in the middle of that action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. You already live your team every day. Now take it up a level and go ad-free. Join the Everydayer Club today and get Locked On Jets with no interruptions, members-only Discord access, and more, all for just $5 a month or $50 a year. Go to LockedOnNYJets.supercast.com or check the link in the show notes to learn more. And today on Locked On Jets, we're looking ahead to 2026. The Jets have clinched a 15th straight season where they have missed the playoffs. We're going to talk about what it's going to take for this team to avoid a 16th straight season. And it's no shock that the Jets missed the playoffs this year. If we're being honest, the seeds of missing the playoffs this year were planted in 2023 and 2024 when the Jets made the trade for Aaron Rodgers and then essentially borrowed a lot of 2025 resources to try and load up around Rodgers. And as we know, the entire thing was a colossal failure. And now the Jets are set in yet another rebuild. This is probably like the 5th rebuild they've been on in the last decade and a half, and they're hoping to get it right this time. What we can say is that the Jets have given themselves ample resources this offseason, with the trades that they've made, dealing Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams. That has added extra draft picks this year and extra draft picks next year. Over the next 2 NFL drafts, the Jets have 8 picks in the first 2 rounds, and that is a big opportunity to build this team. The Jets also have a lot of cap space right now because they just traded 2 of their biggest money players. The Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams contracts are now gone. So, outside of Garrett Wilson, there aren't really a lot of highly paid players on this team. And that means that there is a lot of cap space. And the Jets need that cap space to fill in around the quarterback. In our first segment, we talked about what they might choose to do at the quarterback position. A lot of it's not clear yet because we don't know where the Jets are picking. We don't know how the college football playoff is going to turn out. And the college football playoff could have a big impact on where these quarterbacks are drafted. Will the Jets be in position to draft one of them? Will they like any of the quarterbacks when they're in position to draft who are on the board? We don't know that yet. Jets almost certainly will have to bring in a veteran quarterback. But no matter who the quarterback is, Jets need to put the right pieces around the quarterback because they're not going to have a Mahomes under center. That doesn't happen if you have a rookie. It won't happen if you bring in one of these stopgap veterans. The Jets aren't going to have a Burrow. They're not going to have an Allen. They're not going to have an elite level quarterback. They'll likely have a quarterback who can function if the pieces around him are good enough. And that's true of a veteran. That's true of a talented rookie. One of the things the Jets have messed up too many times is putting the rookie in impossible situations. They did it with Geno Smith, and Geno Smith went on to have success in Seattle. They did it with Sam Darnold. Darnold went on to have success in Minnesota and now is having even more success in Seattle. So these are guys who had ability, but they were just asked to do too much too early in their careers. So how do we avoid that? Well, again, you've got to put the pieces around them. Now, I think that the offensive line is actually in pretty decent shape. Now, the Jets are going to have to figure out 2 starting spots, but I actually continue to grow in confidence that they have the tackle spot figured out. Olu Fashanu has been playing some really good football lately, and Armand Membou is kind of tailing off a little bit near the end of his rookie season. I don't think that's a huge surprise because you have to remember this is kind of the point where the college season usually ends. So maybe Membou getting a little bit fatigued I'm not worried about Membou. I think he's played really well the first 3 months. He's beaten my expectations. He looks like a guy who's going to be there for the next 8 to 10 years. And Joe Tippmann's been playing some good football on the interior. And maybe he moves back to center. Maybe you keep him at guard. I right now would lean towards keeping him at guard because I think it's harder to find a guard than a center. And Tippmann's been playing some really high quality football of late. But I think we're good there. The real question comes at the skill spots. And there's one good guy the Jets can build around. That's Garrett Wilson. And, you talk about some of these other rebuilds the Jets have done in the past. Oh, what we would have given to have a receiver like Garrett Wilson to build around. But there are spots to fill in around Wilson. And over the last couple of weeks, we have not gotten great play from Adonai Mitchell and John Mechie. Now, maybe I should revise that statement a little bit because Mitchell did have a big game last week against Atlanta. But overall, the body of work, I think you have to say, in 4 games, has not been terribly impressive by Adonai Mitchell. And Mechie started off really good. He had a good game against New England 3 weeks ago, a good game against Baltimore 2 weeks ago, and the last 2 have been really bad. He's been dropping balls left and right. I think the hope was that one of these 2 guys might be able to step up and prove that they're a number 3 receiver. I would not have counted on them to be anything more than that, but I think based on what you're seeing, and this could change over the last 4 weeks of the season. We discussed this a little bit on yesterday's show that if they bounce back, their recent struggles could be a thing of the past. It could, by the time we get to the offseason, we may be ignoring it. But based on what we know right now, I think the ideal scenario is that these guys battle it out for the number 4 receiver spot. And I think either of them could be a competent number 4 receiver. They bring different things to the table. Mitchell brings the physical tools. You saw those physical tools on display in Atlanta. And with players at any position, when the physically talented players have things click for them, it can mean big things. Mechie doesn't have the physical tools of a Mitchell. I think he's a savvier route runner, though. I can't really say he's better at fundamentals because he's dropping a lot of passes. But in terms of route running, I think he's ahead of Mitchell. He just doesn't have like the raw physical ability where he's going to make huge plays in the passing game. He's going to be more of a reliable option, or you'd hope he's going to be more of a reliable option, at least if he catches the ball in the short intermediate range. But I think the Jets have to look to bring in 2 receivers this offseason. And the Jets have a lot of cap space, and they're going to have a lot of draft picks. So I think in an ideal world, and look, you can never say this with 100% certainty because it always matters. It always depends on who's available, right? But I think in an ideal world, you'd sign a receiver and you would draft a receiver in the first 2 rounds, where you're going to have 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks. One of them you'd hope would go to a high-quality receiver. I think that it's easy enough to look at the wide receivers who are going to be available this offseason. I don't think George Pickens is going to make it from Dallas. And I don't know that Pickens is a guy you want to bring in. I think that there's a bit of a risk there when you're talking about dealing with a young quarterback. The guy I've had my eye on is Alec Pierce from the Indianapolis Colts. And, Pierce just checks a lot of boxes for me. He's, first of all, he's got a good draft pedigree. So that there are tools there. Second is, he's getting a second contract, guy in his mid-20s. That's the type of guy you want to target in free agency. You always want the guys who are ascending. And Pierce is ascending. He's played better consistently since he's entered the league. His numbers have been on the uptick, and beyond the statistics, because it's not just about box score scouting. People who follow the Colts say he's become a better rounded receiver this year, where he's bringing more to the table. And he also has a skill set that I think Garrett Wilson lacks. I think he's a good complement to Garrett Wilson. Garrett's not really a downfield threat. Pierce is. Garrett brings a lot to the table. There's a lot to love about Garrett. He's a legitimate number 1 receiver, but he's not really a downfield threat. And I think that's where Pierce comes in. And then, there are lots of different options at the receiver position. We'll go into much more detail on them going forward when we talk about the NFL draft. But I think that, a receiver in that spot, if you draft somebody, you have Garrett Wilson and you have a Pierce type. And, my fallback option would be Romeo Doubs from Green Bay, who I wouldn't like him as much as Pierce. I think he'd be my plan B. But if you have 2 veteran receivers, then the number 3 guy can step in. You draft somebody, he can be the number 3 guy. And there's not a lot of pressure on him. If all you need him to be is the number 3 guy, is going to be kind of an afterthought in the offense. He can work on adjusting to the pro game. But if he steps up, it's not like, someone like Pierce or Dobbs is going to be so good to prevent him from getting opportunities. So I think that's the type of situation you want to bring a rookie into. And you put 3 quality receivers around a rookie quarterback, it makes life much easier because rookies kind of struggle going through their reads. They're going to tend to lean on their number 1 read. So if you have 3 quality receivers, the odds go up that your number 1 guy is going to be getting open a lot. And I like the balance of, having a couple veterans and then maybe a young guy who can grow with your quarterback. I think that makes sense. I think you keep Breece Hall, even if it requires using the franchise tag. I would try to extend him long term to make sure he's locked up. But Breece Hall is a young quarterback's best friend. Bad game against Miami, but a guy who's a big play threat. Every 20-yard run Breece Hall rips off is one less 20-yard pass your quarterback needs to hit. And also a reliable checkdown option. If the Jets would ever throw the ball to Breece Hall, they would see that, but they don't. That's for a different day. I think you want to keep Breece Hall and then, fill in the blanks around him, try and find a good complement back as a power guy. And then, hope Mason Taylor grows and maybe find a quality second tight end around him. But I think the key parts here are finding compliments for Breece Hall, finding compliments for Garrett Wilson, and making sure Breece Hall is back. And those are the pieces that will help a young quarterback succeed, or a veteran quarterback who, maybe is not a difference maker, but somebody who can execute within a good infrastructure. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, it can't just all be about offense. I think the Jets are going to have to focus on the offense, but this defense has to get better. And there aren't enough pieces there. We'll discuss what strategy the Jets can take, because they're probably not going to prioritize the defense, but there are things they can do to improve it. That's the head here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Mint Mobile. There's no reason to let big wireless drain your wallet, especially during the holidays. Right now, Mint Mobile is running their best deal of the year. All of their unlimited plans are 50% off. That means you can lock in 3, 6, or even 12 months of unlimited premium wireless for just $15 a month. It's the easiest way to take your overpriced phone bill and give it the full Scrooge treatment. And what makes it even better is how simple Mint makes the switch. No contracts, no nonsense, just real savings and real quality service. Switching to Mint lets you keep your same coverage for a lower price. Setup takes only a few minutes. You can bring your own phone and number without any issues. The service is fast and super reliable, even on the go. Turn your expensive wireless present into a huge wireless savings future by switching to Mint. Shop unlimited plans at mintmobile.com/LockedOnNFL. That's mintmobile.com/LockedOnNFL. Limited time offer, upfront payment of $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12 months. Plan required, $15 a month equivalent. Taxes and fees, initial plan term only. 35 gigabytes may slow when a network is busy. Capable device required. Availability, speed, and coverage varies. See mintmobile.com. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. We're talking about what the New York Jets can do to make the playoffs next year, because it has now been 15 straight years the Jets have missed the playoffs. That's not just the longest streak in the NFL. It is the longest streak in the NFL by 7 years. So this is a Jets team that has not just struggled, they've struggled far more than any other team in the NFL just to put together a quality season. It's been a very frustrating go for Jets fans. And it's going to be a big lift to get this team to the playoffs next year, because in many ways, this team's starting from close to scratch. Now, they do have some pieces. It's not entirely starting from scratch. On the offensive side of the ball, you've got, again, kind of the makings of a good offensive line, and it increasingly feels like you figured out both tackle spots. And you do have a legitimate number one receiver in Garrett Wilson. You also hope that they're going to keep Breece Hall. And they do, if they really need it, they do have the franchise tag to keep Breece. But there are lots of pieces the Jets need to fill in. Jets need to get a quarterback, and they need to put the pieces around the quarterback. So, not an easy task, but Jets can't ignore the defensive side of the ball. Now, this is going to be a balance, because the Jets traded away their two best players on defense at the deadline. They dealt Quinnen Williams to Dallas and Sauce Gardner to the Indianapolis Colts. And in exchange, they got a lot of draft picks. They had 2 first-round picks for Sauce Gardner and a 1 and a 2 for Quinnen Williams. So this team has a tremendous number of assets. And again, they cleared the books of 2 pretty big contracts. So Jets have a lot of cap space this offseason. But I think the big reason you make those deals more than anything is you're kind of reallocating where your team's putting its resources. You had premium defensive players. And make no mistake about it, Sauce Gardner is a premium defensive player. I know he's hurt right now, but premium defensive player. Quinnen Williams, premium defensive player. He's playing great football with Dallas. I think the trade has reinvigorated him. And Quinnen has stated that, in the Dallas system, he's kind of put in better position to make plays than the Jets asked him to do. And, that's not a knock on the Jets. It's just, the defensive tackle spot is one where sometimes you have to do more of the dirty work. Sometimes your job as a defensive tackle is to kind of help other guys succeed by eating up blocks. And you still can be a very good player and do that. I mean, if you look across the league, there are lots of defensive tackles who don't put up huge numbers, but are dominant players. But Quinnen Williams is playing really well with Dallas. The Jets traded them because I think they want to put the pieces around the quality pieces around the next quarterback, whether that's a rookie or whether that's a veteran, because that's going to be essential for this team to win in 2026. But I don't think you can completely ignore the defense. I think that the defense has been put on lower priority. And again, if you're looking to bring in a young quarterback in the next 2 years, that's probably the right move. But you can't completely ignore it because this defense really doesn't have many pieces. On offense, you at least have a core you can build around. On defense, I mean, what's really there right now? There's, Quincy Williams was a first-team All-Pro 2 years ago, but he's going to be a free agent, and he's not having a good season. This is kind of flown under the radar. I hear a lot of people talking about the season Jamie Sherwood's having, which is not good, and Sherwood has not lived up to his contract, but it's kind of been ignored that Quincy Williams has not been playing well. In fact, you may remember a few weeks back, he was briefly benched. I don't know if it was really wasn't benching because he ended up starting the next game because Kiko Maui-Noa was hurt, but it's been a struggle this year for Quincy. And this defensive line is not playing very good football. I mean, they were annihilated against the Miami Dolphins. I think one of the few bright spots for this team on the defensive line has been Jawan Briggs, who has seen his snap total increase since Quinnen got traded. And he's not Quinnen Williams, but he's playing really good football. And he's developing as a pass rusher in ways I don't think we were expecting him to. When the Jets got him from Cleveland, it seemed like he was just going to be a big run stopper. He's going to be a guy who was tough to move, a guy who was prototypical nose tackle, but he's shown some ability to collapse the pocket over the last couple of weeks since Quinnen went down. But elsewhere, you're not getting a lot. I mean, Will McDonald has had like 2 really good games and then been pretty bad other than that. And the 2 games he filled up the stat sheet, he's on 7 sacks, but the game against Pittsburgh, the game against Cleveland are where almost all of those sacks came from. It's not like Will McDonald's playing great. And I hate to say it, but, Jermaine Johnson's not playing very good football either. He played well, early in the season. He played well after he returned from the injury, but I don't think he's playing great football. I think that on the defensive line, there is a lack of talent right now. I think the Jets need to address that. And I think, when you're talking about having 4 premium picks this year and 4 premium picks next year, you're going to have to prioritize the offense. Look, I think there's no question about it. The offense is the bigger thing you got to deal with. And you should put more resources into the offense because it's important to make sure that there's a good infrastructure around the young quarterback. But you have to put some better pieces on the defense. You can't have a defense that gets absolutely torched. Now, big question mark will be how the Jets finish the season in the defensive backfield at corner. Brandon Stevens having a good season. He got beat for a touchdown by Jalen Waddle in Sunday's game. But other than that, he's been having a very good season. A.Z. Thomas has shown some signs of life since he entered the starting lineup in place of Sauce Gardner. Jarvis Brownlee Jr. in the slot has been very up and down. We'll find out what we're going to get from these guys going forward. I think at the safety spot, Malachi Moore has shown he can be a credible starter. The other safety spot's going to be a question mark at linebacker. Jets are not showing good things, and they're going to have to replace Quincy Williams. So up and down the defense, Jets have issues. But I think part of this is that the Jets are going to have to coach these guys up on defense, because in the NFL, you have to prioritize. It's a league with a salary cap. It's a hard salary cap. You only get so many draft picks every year. Even with the extra bounty the Jets have, they're going to have to focus on the offense. So there are certain spots where you just have to be able to coach guys up. And that leads to a question of whether Steve Wilks stays. For Wilks, it's been an up and down season. He started the year horribly. Things kind of leveled off after that. Lately, it has not been great on defense. And I don't know that Wilks is the right guy for this team. I worry, I mentioned this early in the season, I worry that Glenn and Wilks are maybe too similar, where they have these old school sensibilities. And in some ways, I don't think that's bad. I think in many ways, practice is probably too tame in the NFL right now. I think guys who focus on a little bit tougher practice schedule in the training camp and then during the season, I don't think that's a bad thing. But I think if you look at the Jet schemes, they're in some ways kind of outdated. And what I mean by that is I think there are lots of times where Jet scheme is pretty predictable, where you can kind of pick out who the blitzer is before the snap. And they also have not done a good job of implementing the coverages. I mean, how many busted coverages have the Jets had this year? And at some point, if you're having this many busts in the defensive backfield, it's a sign that something's not being implemented correctly. And I can't tell you exactly what it is, but I don't know if things need to be simplified. I don't know if they're just not clarifying things. It's just not working. And I think that maybe the Jets would do better on defense if they had a guy who had some differences from Glenn, maybe a younger guy who's used to more modern concepts, less predictable things that, more cutting edge in the NFL. I think the Jets may need to look at changing defensive coordinators this offseason. And, and that's something I've been talking about since early in the season. I said that I remember after the first couple of weeks of the season, I did a show and I said things need to improve. Things improved briefly, but I think we've kind of regressed. I think we're right back to having the same issues we did at the start of the season. Jets need to upgrade their talent, especially on the defensive line, I think. And I think some of the resources have to go to that, even if you're going to focus more on the offense. But other than that, I think the Jets may need to look at a coaching change on the defensive side of the ball, because I just don't think they're getting what they need from Steve Wilks. Thanks for tuning in today to Locked On Jets. Tomorrow we have our weekly mailbag, so make sure to send in your mailbag questions, and make sure you subscribe and follow Locked On Jets so you get all the latest episodes. Did Locked On Jets make your Spotify Wrapped? Prove it on social media to secure a free month of our brand new Everydayer Club. Just tag our national Locked On Podcast Network account on any social platform, and we'll drop you a code. Be one of the first to join the Everydayer Club to get your favorite show ad-free and exclusive access to the members-only Discord channel. And for those on video, we send you to the first ever 24/7 national NBA YouTube channel. On audio, make sure to make your second listen Locked On NFL. Hope you have a great Tuesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets. Again, it's our mailbag show, so send in your questions. I look forward to answering them.